Good evening and welcome. I'm Paul Amos, founder of The Redeemed. The Redeemed is a community of men built to celebrate men's triumphs over life's difficulties. Today, we have a very special guest, Jeremy Stalnecker, who's here to discuss with us his work with Mighty Oaks and his experience in the military. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you. Looking forward to this conversation.
Jeremy, we'll start where we start with all our guests, if that's okay with you, and just ask, what does redemption mean to you?
I love that word redemption. I think we misunderstand it often, but in the context of the Bible and using the language we have available to us, it's really hard to fully understand the richness of that word redeemed and redemption. But very basically, I think to have something redeemed, it can be a bottle at the grocery store, or it can be a human, it can be an eternal soul. It is to add value where once there was no value. I like that people tend to interchange the word redeemed with restored. To be restored means you're returning to a place where you once were but fell. You're being restored. That's a great word and it's rich. But redemption is so much more than that, particularly when we talk about it in an eternal perspective. I am only valuable as the redeemed because of the Redeemer. I have no value in and of myself. I have nothing to bring to the table. I have nothing to offer. I am valuable because the Redeemer has decided that I am valuable. And the Redeemer has paid a price to add value to me, to give value to me, to provide value to me, because there was once none, and now there is, because he is willing to pay that price. I love the imagery of that. It's taking what had no value and adding value, not because of the one who is redeemed, but because of the Redeemer. And there's so much power in that. There's so much peace. And I could talk about that alone all day long. But I love that word redeemed. It means so much, and so much more than we often give it credit for, because our language is so limited. But God loved me. God has redeemed me. I have value. I have purpose. I have direction because of him and not because of me. So where I fall short, where I'm insecure, where I have been hurt and I'm carrying things that I really don't have the ability to carry, I have value because of God.
I love the delineation you make between restored and redeemed right there. To see it not just brought back, but to be given great value. Yeah, that's an awesome way to put that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Second, I'd love to ask you, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your journey of coming to Christ.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I accepted Christ as a young person. I was raised in a Christian home. In fact, my dad pastored in various capacities. He was a youth pastor. He was a senior pastor. He had been an associate pastor, a lot of different capacities for over 35 years. So I was raised in a Christian home. I accepted Christ when I was 5 or 6 years old. It's funny, I'm 46 now, and I remember sitting in a little circle in Sunday school, and the teacher doing whatever she was doing. I don't even know what the lesson was on, but I do remember she said, "If you don't know that you're going to heaven when you die, raise your hand." And I was 5 or 6 years old. I was scared to death to not go to heaven, so I raised my hand, right? And that teacher, I think she was surprised, so she said, "Well, when you get home, you talk to your dad about that." And I did. And I talked to my dad about that, and he helped me to understand it was much more than just not wanting to go to hell.
Yeah.
It was so much more than that. It was about having a relationship with God through Christ and what that meant. And I became a Christian at that time. I prayed with my dad and really believe that's when I became a Christian. Now, it was probably another 20 years before I really understood what it meant to live the Christian life, and to begin moving forward in that, understanding the sovereignty of God, understanding the purpose that I have as a follower of Christ, understanding what that means to live that out. So making a decision to, repent, turn toward God, away from myself, to accept the gift of salvation was one thing. But then walking in that and beginning to grow in that, I think, came much later.
Wow. Well, that's certainly a very young age, and you did it the right way. Some of us, especially some people on the show, have some opposite journeys and have gone the much wider route and longer route. But it is inspirational to hear as a as a preacher's son, pastor's son, that you found that early on. So shifting a little bit to your career, you were obviously went through ROTC. You were commissioned in the Marine Corps as an infantry, as an officer. And I just love to ask you about your experience in the military and what it was like to be deployed in Iraq.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of growing up in a pastor's home is that kind of the family business is full-time ministry, right? So I remember as a 14-year-old kid, and again, I accepted Christ when I was young. That doesn't mean I haven't done things or didn't do things along the way that weren't pleasing to God. But I remember having a conversation with my dad and asking him the question, would it be okay if I didn't go into the ministry? And he said, son, do whatever God wants you to do. That's the right thing. And that's a good answer. And I said, Dad, I'm glad to hear you say that because I believe God wants me to enlist in the Marine Corps. And he's like, no, God does not want you to enlist in the Marine Corps. Anything but that. But we talked through that. And he said, look, if that's what you believe God wants you to do, we're going to put some things in front of you that you need to accomplish. But on the other side of that, you can move forward. And one of those things was college. And so I went to college because I really had to. And while I was there, figured out that if I would graduate and go through the right programs, I could go into the Marine Corps as a Marine officer, and had a lot of help along the way. I actually didn't go to ROTC. There was a different program that the Marine Corps has, which meant I went to officer candidate school while I was still in college, and it was a great program, and very thankful to have gone through that. So graduated. I had gotten married the year before we graduated, so we were married. We had a child on the way, and I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. And for me, that was the fulfillment, if you will, of a lifelong dream. I mean, we all have dreams, and I had read books when I was, pretty young about men and women in the military, and certainly those heroes of World War II and Vietnam, and looking back to that and just thinking, man, I could be a part of that. I could be a part of that organism, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. I can be a part of that. And so that commissioning into the Marine Corps, and then having the opportunity to become an infantry officer, which was a long process. But man, that for me was what I dreamed about and what I had planned on and what I had focused on and what I looked forward to. And it's interesting because, I went into the Marine Corps, again, married, both Christians, and knew that I needed to live my life for Christ. But in a lot of ways, and I think most people understand this, it wasn't that I stopped being a Christian, right? When you accept Christ, you're a Christian, but that certainly was not my focus. On my list of priorities, living out the Christian life was not at the top of that. In fact, my wife, I was deployed a lot, I was training a lot, and so I made sure that we were in a good church, because I knew my wife and then our infant child needed a place to go to church. But that was kind of the extent of my concern or focus on growing spiritually. So going into the Marine Corps was interesting because there is, there's a clear line between those who are pursuing the world's, path and those who are not. And I certainly wasn't getting involved in things that to most would look like, I wasn't cheating on my wife. I wasn't doing any of those things. I just wasn't living for God the way that I needed to. And I don't know that my testimony was right. I was very focused on doing the job that I had in front of me. And eventually, and the reason I talk about that is because eventually that became a problem for me. But living out the life of a Marine officer, living out the life of an infantry Marine was incredible. Had the opportunity to deploy a couple of times. My final deployment was to Iraq in 2003. Our infantry battalion, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, was part of the initial invasion. In fact, the first Marine infantry battalion that went into Iraq was our battalion. We secured the southern objective of the war in Iraq. First KIA of the war was one of our lieutenants, Shane Childers. Made our way to Baghdad, April 10th. The Battle of Baghdad was also our battalion. Pretty crazy time. And again, for me, that was the fulfillment of what I had always hoped and dreamed I would be a part of. So it was absolutely incredible. Not that war is incredible, but focusing on that for so long, training for that for so long, and then being involved in what that looked like, serving with Marines that are absolutely incredible at what they do. And there's just really no way to describe that. But deployed to Iraq, and then came home. And God had gotten a hold of my heart, and I knew that when I came home from that deployment, I would be getting out of the Marine Corps and going into full-time ministry, which is crazy. Like now, this many years later, it makes sense. But at the time, it was like that was the thing I had been avoiding, staying away from for so long. But God really used that church where I needed a place for my wife and daughter, use that church and those people in my life to help me understand that was the next phase for me. So loved serving, very thankful for the opportunity, particularly for the opportunity to serve in combat, and then came home and transitioned into a completely different world.
Well, let me be the first to say thank you for your service. I mean, that's tremendous, and your accomplishments were obviously also tremendous. That's a great story, and thank you for sharing it with us. So you already kind of delved into the transition, and it was my understanding that transitioning from the Marine Corps into ministry created a bit of an identity crisis. And so I'd love it if you talk to us about what that was like, and also what advice you have for people who are going through similar circumstances as they transition.
Yeah, it did create a bit of an identity crisis. It almost ended my marriage and made my time in ministry very, very short. It's really interesting. And I think this, definitely men understand this. Men get this idea of identifying with the job that you have. Men talk about that, right? Like you meet someone, what do you do? That's one of the first questions. We identify so closely to our jobs, whatever that job is. When you're in the military, it's not just a job. It is a job. It's something that you do, but it comes with rank. It comes with position. It comes with a clear delineation of authority. It comes with the uniform. It comes with something on your collar or on your sleeve that tells everyone else where you fall in that structure of authority. Your focus, your mission, your goals are very clear. And to take the identity of a job is one thing, but to take the identity of a lifestyle, I lived on base. I lived and worked and spent all of my time around those in the Marine Corps. I deployed for many months at a time. I trained for weeks at a time away from home with Marines. My entire identity was wrapped up in who I was as a Marine officer. And particularly, and other Marines would understand this, on the infantry side, my identity was wrapped up in being an infantry Marine. And I started that journey so early. I was 14 years old when I had that conversation with my dad. And so even though I did other things like play baseball and finish high school and work a job and then go to college, everything in my life, in my mind at least, was pointed toward the Marine Corps. So that connection to that, the Marine Corps and service as an identity, was very, very strong and very powerful. And then I transitioned out. And that means a lot of things. One, it means you don't have the uniform, you don't have the clarity on job and purpose and, all that goes along with that. You certainly don't have the same level of respect from the people in your life. And then adding to that, that was my transition out of the military. But we came home from Iraq right at the beginning of June of 2003. July 1st, I was on the church staff. So I had been leading Marines in combat. We had been, fighting bad guys. We had been doing the things that now we look back on and understand how crazy they were. Our infantry battalion of 1,200 Marines rolled into the city of Baghdad, a city the size of Los Angeles, secured the presidential palace on the Tigris River, and effectively at that point in 2003 ended the fighting. That happened, and then I came home, and now I'm serving on a church staff as an associate with very little training. I don't have a Bible degree, trying to get volunteers to do what they said they were going to do, dealing with the church staff that are all great people, but they had no context for where I was coming from. It was 2003, so things like post-traumatic stress and combat trauma and all of that was not anything that anyone was talking about. Yeah. So I brought that loss of identity. I have no idea who I am, which became frustration and then became anger. You don't know who I am. You don't know what I've done. You don't know where I've come from. You should respect me more. And it became a very, very difficult environment for the people around me. At home, I was a complete disaster. I had 2 little kids at the time. I was very, very angry. And a lot of that just stemmed from frustration. It stemmed from just a lack of control, clearly a lack of understanding who I was or what I was even trying to accomplish. I did everything short of physically abusing my family. The fact that my wife, we're getting ready to celebrate our 25th anniversary.
Congratulations.
But at that point, it didn't look like we were going to make it past our 4th anniversary. The fact that she stayed with me is a testament to the grace of God and, her love for God and love for me and working through that. So I was a mess at home. And then on the church staff, and for all the church guys out there, I operated on a church staff the same way I operated on an infantry battalion staff. We go into staff meetings, and if someone said something stupid, I made sure they knew how stupid it was. I was very, very difficult to work around, to the point that 11 months into that time, my pastor called me into his office and said, "Hey, man, this thing is just not working. I love you. I love your family, but something's got to change." And that was the first time that I had been confronted with my behavior being a problem. Part of what he said in that is, you either need to find another job or we need to figure this out. I don't know how to help you figure it out. So I want you to take next week off, and I want you and your wife to go somewhere and start working through this, and then come back and tell me how I can help you. Again, 2003, we weren't talking about any of this. And man, that was a moment where I was confronted with the reality that the people around me weren't the problem. Them not understanding where I came from was an unrealistic expectation that I had placed on them. Why would they understand what I had dealt with and where I'd come from? I was so full of myself and so lost and so confused. I had to begin by taking responsibility for my own behavior, and by then reaching out to people who I knew could help me and put that in context for me. And that began a long road. I always say it took about a year for me to adjust out of the Marine Corps. My wife, she says it took about 10 years for me to adjust out of the Marine Corps. But certainly within that first year, progress was made and we began taking the right steps. That transition is so difficult. And what's interesting is it can happen to anyone. I've talked to folks who were retiring from, jobs. I was talking to my mom about this not too long ago. She worked at Allstate Insurance as an insurance adjuster for, over 30 years. She retired, and we were talking about some of this, and she voiced many of the same feelings I had coming out of the Marine Corps. You find so much identity in what you've done for so long that when that's taken away, you kind of lose yourself until you figure out who you really are. But that can be for any job, anywhere. Certainly this happens a lot in ministry. This happens with moms who raise kids, and then those kids are out of the house. They found so much identity in being a mom and raising the kids that when that changes, they don't know what to do with themselves. And so my advice looking back, and this is such an important conversation, such an important topic, is find your identity in Christ. Find your identity in who He is and who He created you to be. Understand that you will do different jobs over the course of your life. There are different phases and stages of life. You need to work through all of those well, but your identity must always be found in who God created you to be. And, what does that mean? Well, you need to be in the Word to understand that. You need to be in fellowship to have the right people in your life. But it means understanding that God loves you, that He does have a purpose for you, that your purpose with Him does not end when a period of time, a stage, a phase of life, a job ends, and you're continuing to look to Him for direction and guidance. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 has been so meaningful to me. The end of that, run with patience the race that is set before you. The next verse, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of your faith. It's focusing on Jesus and patiently moving forward on the path that God has placed you on. And transition will always be difficult, but when you are able to settle in that, that's changed. The phase, the stage, the role, the job, that's changed. The title, the rank, whatever, it's changed. But now I have another thing in front of me, and I need to pursue Christ in that. That's what carries you forward. And again, there's so many aspects of this, but it comes down fundamentally to understanding who I am in Christ, regardless of what job I am doing. That took me a long time to learn.
Well, thank you for that advice. I mean, finding your identity in Christ is critical. And thank you for sharing that. You know, I can appreciate coming from a first job, which was a complete volunteer army. And I know what that's like working in, not necessarily in the ministry field, but in a similar field where you're having to get people to do things on a volunteer basis.
Right.
Going from, however, the world where command and control and orders drive 100% of all things you do into a world that's completely volunteer, you really had to feel foreign for a while during that transition.
Yeah, it part of it was I just didn't understand, and it's weird, right? Because I came from a church background, so I'd been around that my whole life. It's not like this was brand new to me.
Yeah.
But coming out of the military, I understood mission, and that if that's the mission, if there's a goal out there, we're all going to do what we said we were going to do and work toward that mission and work toward that goal. I knew intellectually that the military was a job. And I knew intellectually that the guys that I was leading had to do what I said because of rank and structure.
Yeah.
But there's an ethos in the Marine Corps. There is this understanding or this idea that really what it is we all have specific roles, but we're working toward a common goal. I know practically that doesn't always play out that way, but that's the thinking, that's the logic. So coming into a church environment where the mission should be bigger than anything we found in the military, it is the mission of bringing folks to Christ or preparing the church so that people can come and hear the Bible preached or whatever the case. If you volunteer for something like serving God through your local church, I could not get my brain around the fact that people would not follow through on those commitments, and that I also had no authority, no stick, if you will, to make them do it. So leadership in the military is one thing, but understand those people have to follow you because you are the positional leader.
Mm-hmm.
When you're working in a volunteer environment, that is a whole different level of leadership and a whole different level of working with folks and learning to communicate well and trying to keep everything out in front of them. But there's probably no more difficult leadership environment, I would imagine, than the ministry environment, because so much of it is, there's such a spiritual side to it, but there's also a practical side, and no one is obligated to do anything.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, you spent a few years working in the ministry, and then at some point you transitioned over and began working with Mighty Oaks. Maybe you can spend a minute talking about Mighty Oaks and how it's allowed your work with both the ministry side as well as the military side to serve others and to serve those in the military.
Yeah, so I served on that church staff that I just talked about. I served there as an associate for 5 years, and God really worked in my life and in my family. At the end of that 5 years, I actually took the senior pastorate of a church in Northern California and left where we were in Oceanside, California, went there, and I pastored there for 7 years. It was an incredible time, and I learned so much, and it was challenging, but it was great. In the process of that, I had a guy reach out to me who I had served with in the Marine Corps, and part of my journey of kind of moving past the Marine Corps and getting over myself and all the things I just described, part of my journey on that was just not looking back. So I didn't really stay connected to Marines that I'd served with. I didn't. It was hard for me to navigate that. So I did not. So 10 years later, one of those Marines reached out to me through social media and said, "Hey, I met this guy. He's starting this organization called Mighty Oaks. It's just getting started, just getting it off the ground. He's trying to help veterans and having a hard time getting veterans to attend. Would you be willing to come to one of these programs if he put one on for us?" So this guy that I served with, he was calling, I think, 10 Marines that he had served with, and we all ended up in Colorado as the Mighty Oaks Foundation was getting started. And that's a crazy story, but it was getting started. And that was the first time in 10 years I had been around those guys. And I started to hear stories of Marines that I served with and Marines that I led, stories of suicide, stories of broken homes, stories of lives that were not being fully lived, and understood for the first time in my life. So I had now been in ministry for, I guess, 10 years, 12 years. I served in a lot of ministry capacities, but I realized for the first time in my life that my service to those Marines didn't end when I put the uniform back in the closet for the last time, that I still had an obligation to continue serving them. And particularly as a Christian, I had the opportunity not only to serve them, but to point them to Christ, point them to the solution for so many of the issues they were dealing with. That was the first time I realized that. During that week, I met Chad Robichaux, who him and his family were founding Mighty Oaks. Chad, also a Marine, had accepted Christ about a year before that. And anyone that knows Chad, that is all he needed to say, I need to do this for other people. But he didn't really have a background in, a program or anything like that. So he asked me to help him out, and we got to work. And since then, that was 2012. Since then, we've had about 4,500 people come through one of our week-long sessions. We have 5 facilities across the country. It's crazy looking back, because then it was like we were kind of begging people to attend and give us a chance. But we have a pretty big waiting list now. 5 locations across the country. We do week-long programs 35 times a year. And we've had thousands of men and women come through one of those programs. Thousands accept Christ, many homes put back together, thoughts of suicide ended. It's been absolutely incredible, and God has really blessed us. So I did that for a while, working to get Mighty Oaks moving while I was pastoring, and then it just became clear that was growing, and God was calling us out of the pastorate, out of church work, and into that in a full-time capacity. And so we've been doing that for quite a while now. But it's been pretty amazing.
5 facilities and that level of impact. Now to hear a wait list, do you feel, you're obviously, what you've done is so tremendous, but there's obviously a demand level that's through the roof. How are you scratching the surface? Do you feel like you're getting there? What is it going to take in order for Mighty Oaks to really help achieve the goal of helping all these people?
So the number's not clear exactly, but there's about 20 million veterans in the United States. So if that was our only audience, there's no way that we could get to 20 million people. We've had an open door with the active duty community. A lot of active duty folks attend our programs as well. We do several active duty conferences over the course of the year where we stand and speak on issues of spiritual resiliency. We've started working with first responders, police, fire, EMTs. So the demand is much larger than any one organization can possibly meet. Now, we've been blessed financially with incredible donors. So we're faith-focused, obviously, but the program itself doesn't cost anything for the attendees. So we cover the cost of the week. We also cover the cost of travel. So probably the most expensive thing we do every year is buy airline tickets. So there's no financial output for someone to attend. So it creates this incredible opportunity for the people that need to attend. And it then grows our opportunity to reach more people. But that, we have about 2,000 people on a wait list that we'll work through. And we are working to get all of those folks in. But what we continue to do is more larger active duty conferences, so we can get, in one day, a lot of people in front of us that may not attend one of our week-long sessions. So that's one of the big things we're doing. A few 100,000 people we've had the opportunity to speak to over the last 10 years through those conferences on the active duty side. We're continuing to grow our relationships with churches to do one-day conferences, at a church that has veterans and has first responders and can bring people together so they don't need to come to a week-long program. We can continue to reach them where they are. And then we have what we call outposts. These are kind of small groups in locations across the country that meet weekly that are also working to fill that void. So we're approaching it from as many different angles as we possibly can and trying to empower others to do the same. But that was a long answer. You're absolutely right. There are so many people that need help. And the need is not diminishing, even though we watch the news and it seems like the wars have gone away. So many people need help, and we're continuing to do everything we can, write curriculum, create resources. Our website has a ton of videos and other resources. we are doing everything we can in every arena we can to get the information to those who need it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned watching the news. One of the topics that's on the news, it seems like all the time now when it comes to the military, is post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
And I would love it if you talk for a minute about what y'all are doing to try and help families and help individuals as they come home, and what warning signs are there for people dealing with post-traumatic stress.
Yeah. That's a really big topic, obviously, and it is one that has been focused on quite a bit. Going back to when I came home in 2003, if you asked me in 2003, is post-traumatic stress real? Is post-traumatic stress disorder real? I would say no. And this is while I'm like screaming at my kids and, almost getting fired off of church staff. No, there's nothing to that. Thankfully, there has been a lot of research and a lot of people are working on that, stacks of research on what it is. Obviously, we can go back historically and see that post-traumatic stress, not called that, but post-traumatic stress has been around for as long as there have been people fighting each other. There are symptoms. There are real symptoms. In fact, post-traumatic stress is diagnosed right now, not through any kind of a medical scan or a medical procedure or a test. It's diagnosed symptomatically. And so someone could sit in front of a therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist, a doctor, and explain that there's several categories of symptoms, but I'm having problems sleeping. I have social anxiety, many, many different categories of that. And it began when, and they go back to a traumatic event. The question is, how are we helping with that? And there are a lot of therapeutic or clinical programs to help those who are dealing with post-traumatic stress. We could walk through all of those. There's a lot of them, from medication to different types of therapies to activities, a lot of different things that people are doing. We're completely faith-focused. We're not a clinical program. So very basically what we do is we say, look, trauma has happened. Trauma will happen. We talk about what it is and what it isn't. We spend a little bit of time on that. We acknowledge that trauma is not reserved for those who have served in the military. In fact, statistically, we're told that 70% of Americans at one point or another will deal with or endure a clinically diagnosable traumatic event. So 70% of Americans. So this is not reserved for you who have served, but it does happen. And when trauma happens in your life, it's now a part of your life. You're not going to get over it or get past it or forget it, but it does not need to have control of you. It doesn't need to have you bound or chained up. You can move forward in a meaningful way. And the way that we deal with that is by acknowledging that God is, as the creator. He created us with purpose, with design. Even trauma works into our design. He created us with purpose and direction, and we need to find that in him. So when we are aligning our lives to the life that God created us to live, and throughout the week, that's what we spend time talking about, different aspects of how God created us to live. When we understand that and we move toward that, trauma is still in our past, but it does not control us anymore. We're moving into a new purpose and a new direction. When a man or woman gets a hold of that, because trauma in so many ways, it becomes an identity. This is why identity is so important to me. I am the victim of what happened back here. I experienced this traumatic event. My identity is wrapped up in that, and I can't move past it. You hear people talk about that. Everything brings me back to that. The way I view the world is through the lens of that traumatic event or that series of traumatic events. Everything is about that trauma. What we do is say, well, that did happen, and certainly has an impact on you. There's even a psychological, emotional, physiological impact on you, of course. We need to work through all of those things. But you are not that. You are what God created you to be, how God created you to live, and we can move forward in the creation, the design of creation that God has set in front of us. And so we work diligently to that end. And it's been amazing, because a lot of folks who attend our programs, for many, many years, the majority of people who attended our programs are not Christians. In fact, a lot of people will show up and say, I hate God, or I don't believe in God, whatever the case. But I've tried everything else and nothing else works. I've tried the therapies. I've tried the pills. We have guys come to us who are on more than 20 medications a day. 20 medications a day.
Wow.
They're masking the pain. they're medicating the pain. They're preventing themselves from feeling the pain, but there is no real healing. And we understand as Christians that the real healing comes when we understand who God is, the fact that he wants to have a relationship with us, that we are broken and sinful, but Christ paid the price for that sin, and we can enter into that relationship. And then understanding that the Bible tells us, it gives us a roadmap on how we should live. And we talk about so many different areas and help folks navigate that. But it's not denying trauma, nor is it embracing it as a badge or as a legacy or as an identity. It's acknowledging it and then also acknowledging that God has more for me than what happened back there.
Yeah. For a lot of people that I've encountered, and when you put out a statistic like 70% of people having a traumatic event, they don't know they've been through trauma. And it sounds like you didn't know you've been through trauma coming out of the military. How do you, in these groups, when you're sitting people down for the first time who are on 20 medicines, who are doing these things, how do you let them know that they've been through trauma and that they can get past it?
Yeah. So we're in a unique situation where in the military culture, the veteran environment, most of the men and women who attend one of our programs have actually been clinically diagnosed as having post-traumatic stress. So they've sat in front of a doctor and they've been clinically diagnosed. That is a fascinating question, though, and I'll tell you how I address this outside of the military world. There's a specific definition for trauma and post-traumatic stress. It's found in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, edition 5, which is kind of the Bible for emotional, psychological disorders and so forth. And it ties clinically diagnosable post-traumatic stress to the death of someone close, near-death experience, sexual abuse, or a violent act. So the men and women that we're dealing with, they can say, I've experienced trauma. It was connected to one of those, so I have post-traumatic stress. And yet there are a lot of people living in the world, going to our churches and, in our communities that wouldn't say that exactly, but something's happened in their life that has completely embraced them. They can't get past it. A definition that was given to me a number of years ago, and I love it. Trauma is an event or series of events that pushes one beyond their ability to cope. I love that definition. It doesn't have anything to do with clinical, with the DSM-5. We could argue about what's real. It doesn't matter. If you have an event or series of events you've been through in your life that have pushed you beyond your ability to cope, so you're not functioning the way God created you to function because of what's happened to you, then you need to address that as trauma. It's a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events. These things have come into your life. They've so overwhelmed you. They've become your identity. You can't move past it. You hear this language. You need to treat that as something that needs to be dealt with as trauma, because that's exactly what it is. And so I try to differentiate between what a clinician, a therapist, a psychiatrist would say, and how trauma actually affects us, because people put themselves on these islands, right? It's like, well, I was diagnosed, so it's real. Or I don't know why I am this way. I know it's happened, but it wasn't death or near death or sexual abuse or violence, but something happened and I just can't move forward. But it can't be trauma because it's not that other thing. Trauma, an event or series of events that pushes one beyond their ability to cope. If that's you, you need to deal with that and address that.
Well, thank you. I love that definition of trauma.
Yeah.
That is powerful.
It's powerful.
So you're an author, a podcaster. How can our audience get in touch with some of your resources as they listen to this and maybe want to explore further?
Well, I appreciate that question. We produce a lot of resources. I'll say the very simplest way is to use my name, Jeremy Stalnecker, jeremystalnecker.com. And I have a website. And on that website, a couple of different blogs, podcasts that I'm involved with, all of my social contacts. and links out to the Mighty Oaks Foundation. All that's on jeremystalnecker.com. So it's the very easiest way to get in touch with me and also what we're doing. If you're just interested in Mighty Oaks, go to mightyoaksprograms.org, mightyoaksprograms.org, and you can get there from my website as well. But yeah, so many great resources on our Mighty Oaks website. We've got tons of videos, other resources that are just intended to be helpful to those that may not be ready for a program or want to attend a program or have the time, whatever, but they're there for you.
As you might imagine, with this being January, we're kicking off a lot about new beginnings and a lot about fresh starts. So I'm curious, as you looked at your goals and opportunity for new things in 2023, anything you'd love to share with us about what you're doing to do things differently and to begin afresh?
I like this time of year, and I always mention that there's really nothing inherently different between the end of December and the beginning of January. But what a great opportunity we have collectively to go, all right, let's reflect, and then let's project, right? Let's look back, and then let's look forward. And it's so important to come back and ask God, what would you like to see me accomplish this year? And can you empower me to do that? For me, I think this year, so last year there was a lot of change in my family, a lot of change even organizationally, change of focus. And coming into this year, my goal is to get a hold of the things that have changed, to focus on what God has set in front of me. And there are a number of things from writing and communicating and, podcasting. Podcasting is funny. I don't know if there's money in it for someone, but probably not for most of us. We do it as a resource, right? And that's why I do it, to provide opportunity for people to learn and to grow and to develop. So doing more of those things, but continuing to push the organization to reach as many people as possible.
That's great. Well, if you don't mind, I'd love to shoot a couple of rapid fire questions at you. Our audience loves to get to know our speaker.
Sure.
And this is just simple things.
All right.
Let's start with the book you're reading right now.
Oh man, the book I'm reading right now. I'm always reading like 5 books at the same time, but the book I'm reading right now, probably most regularly, is a book called Truth Changes Things. And it's an incredible book, and it goes back historically to moments in time historically where Christians have either discovered something scientifically, archaeologically, so many different facets of the world where Christians were involved in helping the world make progress. It's a fascinating book. Truth Changes Everything.
Favorite activity to do with your wife or with your kids?
With my kids, we do a couple of things. So myself and my kids all train jiu-jitsu, so we spend a lot of time, on the mats doing that. That's fun. Probably more fun, and what I enjoy more is going to the beach. We live in Southern California, and myself, my daughter surf, my son surfs, my older son, and I have 4 kids. So the other kids, my wife, just enjoy being out there, and I just love it. There's nothing like being at the beach and being in the water and spending time together.
All right, favorite food. If you're going out to dinner, where are you going? What are you eating?
Man, I'd eat a hamburger for every meal if I could pull it off. So there's some good places, but I'm not against a bad hamburger either. I love hamburgers. I'm a pretty simple guy. A good steak, I'm down with that too. My wife is a vegetarian, so anytime I can come up with a reason to eat meat, I'm going to do that.
Good for you. Favorite book of the Bible.
Favorite book of the Bible. Man, that's like picking your favorite child. I don't know if I can pick a favorite book of the Bible. I always say that it's the one I'm studying right now. It's the beginning of the year, so I'm reading through Genesis right now and just thoroughly enjoying it. Probably the book I go back to the most often, though, would be the book of Philippians. So much there. The title of my podcast is March or Die, and I find that spirit of move forward or you're going to die where you are from the Apostle Paul. And the book of Philippians is where he talks about not looking back, but continuing to move forward.
And last but not least, whose podcast are you listening to?
Oh, man. I'm listening to, what am I listening to? I don't know, man. I listen to podcasts that have guests that I care about. So I don't have a podcast I listen to every episode of, but if I come across one, I probably got 10 on my Spotify list, right? And if there's a guest on there that I care about, I'll jump on that. I'll tell you, one of my favorite recently is actually a friend of mine named Adam Comer. He runs an addiction recovery program, and they've got an incredible podcast, S2L. The podcast is called Life After Addiction. I've really been enjoying that so much there, but just some incredible podcasts. I always look for the guests that I want to listen to and kind of go that way.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you coming on and imparting such wisdom upon us.
Well,
to our audience, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us, to listen, to learn, and to hear what Jeremy Stalnecker has done in his career and the advice that he has for all of us. Please continue to listen in. We're very excited about the fact that we've transitioned from podcast once a month to once a week, starting in 2023. We hope that this is going to continue to impart positive things in your life as we kick off January with things being brand new. We hope all is well. We wish you the best. Good luck and Godspeed.